Here comes Dr. Ben Carson. In a new poll, he takes down Donald Trump from the top spot in Iowa. Now, this is one in several polls, 4 to be exact, that put Dr. Ben Carson on top in the early primary state of Iowa. Now, this fourth one is the Loras College Poll, and it shows Dr. Carson leading the still crowded Republican field by 30.6%. Donald Trump is all the way down at 18.6%. Now, when they were asked to pick a second choice, undecided polled at 22%, while Carson remained the top name for the second choice at 19%. So, that's big, right? Well, not exactly. See, here's the thing about Iowa Republicans. They're actually very religious. And Dr. Ben Carson, also pretty religious, and he's playing that up in Iowa. So there's kind of an explanation of why Dr. Ben Carson's doing so well. Winning in Iowa doesn't actually mean that you've got the race on lockdown. Remember, Rick Santorum won Iowa. He won the Iowa caucus back in 2012. Is he president? No. Did he even get close to getting the nomination? Absolutely not. So Iowa is not as much of a big deal as a lot of pundits and polls seem to make it. But nonetheless, it is significant. It is the first state. And a win there certainly doesn't hurt your chances anywhere else. Now, the polls could change between now and the Iowa caucus. You could see Donald Trump retake the lead, or you could see somebody else. You might see a resurgence of Carly Fiorina or Marco Rubio, for example, but I'm not entirely sure. Since it is Iowa, since they are very religious over on the Republican side, I wouldn't be surprised to see a Mike Huckabee surge. Don't know. But right now, as it stands, Dr. Ben Carson in a commanding lead. Alright, so now news of this poll didn't exactly make Donald Trump happy. And this morning, he actually phoned into Morning Joe to talk about this. And Mark Halperin, who was also a guest, who was on the panel there, took this opportunity to challenge him. Watch this clip.
I want to ask you about trying to settle once and for all your relationship with polls. When you're ahead in the polls, you cite them, you act like they're scientific gospel. When we see polls where you're behind, sometimes you often will challenge the pollster, the organization, the methodology, the legitimacy of the poll. So how do you determine how do you justify or explain attacking polls where you're behind but celebrating polls where you're ahead?
Well, I think you have to understand polls. And when I was at school, when I was at Wharton, we actually had a case on polls. We had a 1-month study on polls. And I believe in polls. I generally believe in polls. The thing with these polls, they're all so different. They're coming from all over the lot, where one guy's up here and somebody else is up there, or you see swings of 10 and 12 points and, like immediately, even the same day. So right now, it's not very scientific. I think it's very hard when you have this many. But overall, Mark, I am a believer in polls. I think they say something. At least they spot a trend.
I'm a big believer in polls, especially when they say I'm ahead. Well, let's be fair on that. Now, he's sort of right and he's sort of wrong. Now, let me go through into why I think that's the case. Now, some polls, and I pointed some out, that actually have terrible methodology. If you're polling less than 1,000 people, it's not exactly accurate. Now, this is 4 different polls, and the methodology is different among each of them. But these 4 separate polls lead to an average of Dr. Ben Carson being ahead of Trump. Take it all together, that's significant. That does show a trend, and that's exactly what Donald Trump was talking about. They may not be scientific, each and every one of them on their own, but taken together, they do show a trend. And that trend, whether Trump likes it or not, shows Dr. Ben Carson ahead. Now, on the trend, I also agree with Trump that it can spot trends. And as I mentioned, the trend goes to Ben Carson. Now, the thing is here about polling, and I think a lot of us here do it, is that, like Trump, we tend to trumpet polls, no pun intended, that show our guy ahead and dismiss ones that aren't. Now, we have to be better about doing that. And I may have, there are probably instances that I've done that as well. And so you really have to step back and take a look at polls objectively. And I myself need to do a better job at doing such things.